Hello, everyone, and welcome to Lesson 5 of our AI Masterclass series. Thank you for making it here. This is our final lesson, and I am joined today by Zach Winth, who, for a lot of our panelists, we've gone with people that I've worked with for a number of years, have been at Telium or around Telium for, close to a decade at this point, which I think brings a lot of value. With Zach, we actually get a new perspective. He's only been with Telium a few months now, but already he has been impressive and impactful on the business. I know I've used some of his talk tracks and his content, and it's modified my own approach there. So I really wanted to make sure we got his voice in this lesson as well. So Zach, thanks for joining me.
Yeah, thanks, Dustin. I'm excited to be here, and yeah, as the newbie on the team, I guess. But I'm not new to Martech or even CDP in general. So I was excited to get to join the team here at Telium, and even more excited to talk about Agentic AI with you today. So
That's right.
um,
Yeah, the big new frontier. And it's all been building up to this, right? We set the stage on what the challenges are and the pressures of the industry with Jeff. Rob and I talked about how to have that data foundation and how it really all ties back to making sure you have the right data collected in the right ways and accessible at the right times. We talked with Drew about traditional AI and more modeling AI, being able to be predictive and produce scores that are impactful. We talked with Sav about generative AI and LLMs and how to use that technology to impact customer experience. And all of that's really laid the groundwork for what we're all so excited about, which is this kind of unknowable future. So I've given Zach the impossible task of telling us, what's next? What is our future with agentic AI in terms of customer engagement and experience?
yeah. Yeah, and I think it's funny because as I was prepping for this, I'm like, we're gonna write this and we're gonna talk about the future, and we're recording this a little bit in advance, and who knows what'll happen between now and in a week or two, or in a couple of weeks when this actually comes out, because things
Yeah.
are, you know, moving so wildly. But just a quick recap, and then we can kind of dive in. So obviously, Sav in the last session kind of talked about this path to generative AI or LLM maturity, and a way to start, just use the platform, start to understand how they work, and you work your way up to this idea of agentic. And I think really everybody's going, okay, well, what does that mean? What is agentic? What is, how do I use it? Should I be using it? And I started playing with AI, at least generative AI and LLMs, very quickly after ChatGPT did their release back, 3 years ago now. And I always I always have a Christmas project. It's always like around the holidays when things get
Mhm.
quiet. I
You get
pick
a
my
few
like,
extra hours or days.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. Or I need a break from, I love my family, but like I'm an introvert, so like I need that, like I'm gonna focus, hyper fixate on
Mhm.
something. And there was a year, every year it's always some topic, and AI was like, oh, I'm gonna deep dive. I also did the metaverse, and that kind of fell aside, so like at least one of them panned out. But it's so interesting how fast and how far we've moved, and how fast it will continue to move. But I
Mhm.
think, you know this whole class, and I've been excited to kind of watch everybody else's sessions and whatnot. But I think, let's start again at the foundation, because I know some people maybe are joining us in the middle, and kind of just define, like, get to the point of what is agentic AI. And so,
Mhm.
actually working with our marketing team here, we did a similar content. So let's just start with some definitions, and then we can talk about the future. But when you hear agentic, when you hear this idea of an AI agents, really there are flavors of that, or there are different kind of ways that could be interpreted. And so this is probably a wild oversimplification. So this is the marketer view of it, as a product marketer and a lifelong marketing guy who just happens to be a nerd. This is my kind of rationale. But the base is those kind of reasoning or chain of thought models. Use them today, potentially, Claude, ChatGPT, Gemini, where they're doing some thinking and they're going through a series of steps to give you, an answer. And that is the foundation of everything else that comes beyond that. The next level up is AI automation, where you're adding AI to some sort of workflow. I'll walk through kind of in depth each of these, and then the last one is true kind of that agentic orchestration, which really is just meaning that the agents themselves are making decisions on what comes next. So if we break that down, like let's look at like what that actually means. So ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini, Dustin, what's your favorite? Which one is your favorite of the three?
I try to use them all a little bit to make sure I'm evaluating them. I end up using OpenAI the most, ChatGPT, especially for like the conversational pieces.
Yeah. I get in like habits where I'm like, I use
Mhm.
one for a week, and then I'm like, oh yeah, I need to go and check on Claude. I
Mhm,
haven't talked to
mhm.
him in a while. So Gemini is surprised me a lot lately when they've come out
The
with their new one. It's gotten a
the newer
lot better.
Gemini, yeah, I had kind of dismissed Gemini at first, but they've made a lot of improvements.
Yeah. But fundamentally they all work kind of the same way, right? So let's kind of think about this, all right? We had this LLM, which going back to even some of the earlier sessions where we talked about our predict models at Telium. LLMs are just predicting the language that is the best logical answer or the best logical response to what you're asking. And the way they do that is through some instructions. So behind every LLM there's two layers. There's the system instructions, which is the information that guides the LLM itself on the guardrails, right? It's the lens in
Mhm.
which it sees the world. Everybody, ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini, they're all trained roughly on the same content, right? They all have access to internet, they have access to archives, and reading material, but the system instructions then tells it how to interpret and think about and rationalize and work with that information. So that's how you get the kind of different personalities, different flavors, different focus areas, the depth at which they go into content, all of that kind of system instructions are kind of what guides that. And then on top of that, you know, as users of the platform, we can add additional system instructions on top of it, right? Act as a marketer, act as an analyst, think about this, right? We're giving it some guidelines to kind of take its worldview and make it much more focused, so we get the output that we want. And then beyond that is the user instructions, where we say, okay, write me a blog post on X,
Mhm.
Y, and Z. It's what we want. And so the combination of those two things are what generate the result.
Yeah.
And that was what the early rounds of LLMs did.
Yeah.
Then,
It just real jumping in here real quick.
yeah,
When Sav and I were talking about this, we used the analogy of, the LLM is, if you compare this to a human, the LLM and what it's been trained on and its weights and nodes that it's using, that's kind of like the DNA of a human. It's what you're born with as your underlying instructions. The
yep,
system instructions and the boundaries and the guardrails and guidance you put on how you're going to be using this LLM is like the person's experiences, what they've learned, they're trained in, what their talents are. And then the
yep,
user instructions are like the experience they're in now. What is that person being asked to do in this environment? And
yeah,
so lining all that
absolutely.
up.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Yes, and that is great, right? And then, but the problem is there's some limitation that comes with that, because
Mhm.
the LLM is trained on a certain amount of information, and if it doesn't have that, right, the recent information or knowledge about a certain thing, that's when hallucination happened. We heard a lot about that at the especially early on, when ChatGPT, when you were talking like the 3 level, models came out, and
Mhm.
so what happened is this idea of context, right? Adding context to the interaction, and that can be through you know files that you give directly into the LLM itself. It's like, hey, here's who Telium is, here's how we talk, here's our tone, or it could be web searching. Recently, my oldest, had to buy a new car, and she was looking at Subaru, and I used it to go do a whole lot of web searches for me around like, okay, tell me about the Subaru Crosstreks. We're looking at an older one, so like, what are the different trim models? What are the options? And it goes out and does 40, 50, web searches. Saves me a whole lot of clicking, but it packages all of that context up into information. And so now the LLMs are working a little bit smarter. They're able to kind of synthesize, information in a more useful manner to the user.
Yeah.
But it's also go ahead.
That kind of research mode, to put it
Right.
practically, in the
Yes.
ChatGPT and Perplexity, I really like theirs, where they do the inline references and things.
Exactly. Yep. It's showing you the sources. It's showing you all the information. And then as you've seen, a lot of them add now the latest, which is kind of this idea of tools. And that's now not just having context. So I'm not just loading a file, but I can now point it at, natively, at a CRM. Or I can use MCP, which is Model Context Protocol, which is basically just the AI's version of an API, right? So in SaaS world or in tech world, we have computers, and then when they need to, talk to each other, we use a language, we use an API to connect those systems. In AI world, MCP is kind of a leading way of making that communication happen, right? There's a server and there's a client, and they communicate over an MCP, which means now not only can an LLM, a chat, agent, have context you give it, have files, but it can go out and also use enterprise tools. It can use weather applications. It can use a lot of other ways. We use Asana to manage marketing, kind of workflows here at Telium, and I can ask Claude to go out and give me a breakdown of all the things that are on my to-do list, in Asana, and it'll go and look at all my tasks. It can prioritize them. It can be like, hey, this one looks important, and you haven't done it yet. Should you, maybe you should. And I'm like, yes, you're right. Thanks, Claude. But that's the LLM. Like that's how the concepts work at their core, right? And when we now think agentic, it's not different. That's the beauty of all this, is like, if you understand this screen, the next one gets pretty easy, because an agent is simply going to have a LLM interaction, right? That then makes some decisions on what context, what tools, what information it needs. And it's going to go through a series of steps, and maybe actually, do multiple kind of, steps, or what we call like chain of thought, reasoning, to come to an answer. There's still system instructions. There's still user instructions. It may write its own additional system and user instructions based on, well, what do I need to achieve? Well, here's what I think. Here's my hypothesis. Here's my here's the files I should get access to. And so rather than the user having to be as explicit with, here's the specific files, here's the specific websites, here's the tools, the agent, the base level agent can kind of go out and make that decision based on what it has access to.
Have some autonomy
right? Yep, exactly.
And processing. Yeah.
Yes. And so again, at its core, that is kind of what Claude, and if you start to do some of the reasoning models, so O3 in ChatGPT, where it comes up with a plan of attack, and then it does, it works through multiple steps. This is really kind of behind the scenes what's happening, is the agent kind of comes up with its plan and says, okay, I'm going to go do these things. And those little kind of sub processes are really multiple chats happening at once, where step one might be doing the research. Step two might be consolidating that into, a priority. And then step three is creating that output, based on all of that information. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. It's a really good breakdown. I appreciate you keep talking through each individual part and then how they work together.
And so then once we have that idea of like, okay, now that's an agent, how do we get to this idea of like agentic workflows or orchestration or, what comes next, right? And that's where now we have kind of these divergent paths, if you will. And so when we're really thinking of like orchestration in agentic world, there's kind of there's two methods right now that are very popular. And I'll say this very bluntly at the beginning, and I'll say it very bluntly at the end. Neither are right, neither are wrong. Both are perfect if it gives you the output that you need, right? And I think sometimes when there's new technology, people come out and they get very very adamant about one way or another. Or they use big words, or they start to gatekeep tools to make it sound harder, to make what they're doing seem fancy. And frankly, again, use the tool that gives you the output. So the first one is just automation, right? We've had workflow and automation in processes, business process rules, and marketing automation for years. But now the ability to add as a node or as a step in that workflow an agent or an LLM that enhances that workflow is super powerful. And you see this with everything from like robust platforms like an N8N, which is a kind of a workflow orchestration tool that has agents into it. Also, you can see it's starting to crop up in a lot of enterprise applications where there's already a kind of a business process optimization, but now they're doing things like summarization with an LLM, or other steps that just make it more user friendly throughout the entire process, right? And so in a workflow, typically it's still more rules driven, that then the AI just adds value to. So there's a trigger. In this case, I got a trigger does something, agent goes out, got some information, and then maybe we have a user defined decision tree. Well, if the response is positive, we're gonna summarize it. If it's negative, we're gonna drop it into a Slack channel, or we're gonna drop it into a message for somebody to follow up with, right? And so that can be used 100 ways. And beauty of this is I'll show you them in here in a couple minutes. I'll show you a couple different scenarios. But these are great. These are great ways to start to automate tasks. They're great ways to start to add value to any level of your organization, whether that's internally, processes and tasks that are painful. Was talking with my brother over the weekend. He runs a kind of a land management company. He works with clients, and they have a lot of SOPs. They deal with chemicals and they deal with all this stuff. And he's like, the time to sit down and write an SOP is just burdensome. And so they've started using AI to say, here's all our past SOPs, here's documentation on these things. It can kick out a draft in minutes, and then they go into it, and they have to edit, and they have to tweak, and they put some other information and validate. He goes, but the ability to have that little step of orchestration, that's something I may have hired an intern for, or when people were on restrictive duty because they were injured, like now AI can solve for those problems of those things where you want somebody to do, but you'll never be able to convince somebody to give you budget to hire for that task alone, right? And I think that's where agentic in the enterprise has its most value today, right? Today. But where are we going? Like, what's next? Well, workflows are great, but still require, as a user, Dustin, from you as an implementer, like it requires a lot of hand holding and control, right? We've got to set up all these guardrails. We've got to set up all these guidelines. We've got to debug the process, and it's valuable, but it's also kind of painful, right? And so
you're generally dealing with some sort of predefined or boundaries around what the actual input is, and you have some pretty clear boundaries on what the output is, and you get that help in the middle, but you've got to design that end to end.
you still got to design that end to end, right? And you got to know what steps you should take, or you define what steps should be
Mhm.
taken.
Yeah.
Versus where we go, the next level is really that idea of like a true agentic orchestration is where the agent is making the decisions on the steps necessary, right? And so you start with that same logic of system instructions, user instructions. This is what I want you to do. And then the agent will, or the orchestrating agent. So this is where we introduce the concept of, you know, different styles or different kinds of agents, right? So there are agents that are given rules to say, like this is a writing agent, this is a summarization agent, this is a operations agent who has access to different tools, where you're creating these discrete, well-defined kind of areas of opportunity or areas of knowledge for each of the agents. And then you have an orchestrator whose job it is to say, great, I have a problem, I have a task, I'm going to go out and figure out how to solve that. And I'm going to look around and I'm going to say, okay, here are all the agents at my disposal. Who should I use to complete this task? And so that may be, okay, well, I'm going to need to do some research. So I send my research agent out to go crawl the web. And then I'm going to have another agent that's going to go out and summarize all of the Google Drive documents that it finds, and it brings that together. Then the output from those two feed, potentially a third agent who starts putting all that synthesis together and making, recommendations and so forth. And it just cascades down. But the distinction here is really the ideas as a, as a builder, right, or as a person
Mhm.
putting this together, you are creating a team. So you're creating a team of different skill sets and you're bringing them together in a room, and then you're giving them a problem. And then as a leader, you're leaving, right? You leave and you let them figure out how to, drive the outcome that you want to achieve. And this is the, the ideal situation, or the ideal outcome. I think that a lot of uh, organizations and brands are hunting for.
Mhm.
Um, but it takes work, right? And there are platforms that do this really well. There are people who are obviously building a lot of this today. But the reality is, this is such a fast moving and such a you know uh, iterative environment, that this idea of end-to-end orchestration through all agents is either it kind of goes down one path or the other. It works really, really well, or it fails miserably, right?
Yep.
And all of that comes down to context. So how much information you gave to the agents, right? Did they have the right tools, right? So if you're the leader of the team, did you give them the tools necessary to do the information? Did you train them properly,
Mhm.
so that they know what their task is and what good looks like? That's a key factor there. What does good look like? What does correct
Mhm.
look like? Did you give them enough enough information up front to know that there's not ambiguity in the request that you made of them, right? And so those are all of the things that drive the success of outcomes. And I've been on the implementation side. I mean, Dustin, you feel this all the time. When you think of it, a statement of work, or like the implementation is good as the information that you get, right? And when
Mhm.
you have good information up front and the use cases and everything, things go a lot smoother. If it's a lot of, well, we're going to figure it out as we go, that's where rework happens. That's where
Mhm.
pain comes into play. This isn't any
Analysis
different.
paralysis, and yeah, got to
Exactly.
redo configurations because you didn't have the right information up front. Totally.
Right. And sometimes that's okay, right? As we're
Mhm.
learning these agentic models, where you do them in non-mission critical situations where you can test and you can be like, oh, that's not the output that I want. That's not, and we're personally doing this today at Telium with agentic tools, in the marketing team, right? We build a lot of case studies, and a lot of times that means, we do an interview, we talk to customers, we get some feedback, we take a transcript. Somebody has to, normally would write all of that up. Being able to drop all of that into an agentic flow that says, okay, here's all your inputs. Write me it goes and figures out which stats it thinks are the best. What's the right angle for the story, writes it, creates, an article, but also creates some social posts. Like that's a goal. That's something we're working on. There's still rough edges. There are, it's like, oh, the output it created, it didn't quite follow the formatting. So you have to go in and you give it a couple different examples, or you mention it, and it's just but once it's working, it's going to make life, it cuts out hours of work that now can be spent on, other activities, more strategic tasks, building another agent for something else down the road.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah,
this is where organizations are heading.
yeah. I really love this framework. And I think one thing, you and I were talking about this a little earlier, and you mentioned this idea of AI gatekeeping, this kind of snobbery approach of people evaluating, oh, you're not really using agents in the right way unless you've got this fully agentic approach and you can leave them and set it and forget it. And it's, you don't get extra credit for that. There's no
Yeah,
badge for the most use of agents, or the hands off.
yeah,
Exactly, to your point, it's about the outcomes that you need to get to. I know for a project we were just working on internally, we set out with this kind of thesis about how we could apply this agentic approach to a problem that we were trying to do. And as we started actually solving for it and working through it, it turned out a lot of it was pretty deterministic code. And it wasn't actually agentic in a lot of senses. And we had pieces where an LLM was helping us name things or deciding, which way to go. But ultimately, it was really automated. And
yeah,
that was the right approach for us. We want to keep it as simple as possible, and that was what we ended up doing there. And it wasn't going to be better for us by replacing something that was pretty straightforward and programmable into having an LLM do it for us or decide to do it. So,
right, right.
um, yeah.
Yeah.
The
So,
other thing I'll say, just real quick, is that this reminds me of is I have a 6-year-old and a 10-year-old, and it's kind of like with my 6-year-old, we've got some automation going on. We'll take laundry for example. Like I can say, hey, go put your clothes in the washing machine, and this one I kind of have to still help, but like you put the soap in and start it, and we take it kind of piece by piece, and she can do like, oh, I've got a basket of laundry, I know how to sort these into different piles and fold them. Um, but for my 10-year-old, I can give her just a more general instruction of like, hey, make sure you have clothes to wear. And
yep,
implicit in that is, oh, I have to get my dirty clothes in the laundry when it's full. I have to go wash them when they're washed. I have to dry them when they're dried. I have to put them away. And she's able to kind of complete this whole process end to end by this really basic input from me.
right, right, exactly, and exactly. And where we teach our kids, we're like, oh, well, that wasn't quite right. This is what good
Mm-hmm.
looks like,
Yeah.
I think the beauty of, like you said, is pick the outcome that you want, and how you get there. Sometimes it's just easier to cut and paste from ChatGPT,
Yeah.
and so let's go through a couple examples, and it's the same. Like, we're going to solve the same problem. We're going to solve it 3 different ways, in kind of 2 different styles. So first one, this is a kind of a standard sales enrichment, maybe a B2B scenario, something I think a lot of, marketing people deal with, a lot of, whatever. I've got my CRM here, and I'm a salesperson. I got a new lead that came in, and I have, customer name. So it's Acme Corporation. I've got their URL, but I don't have a lot of details about them, and I don't really know what their challenges are. I haven't talked to them yet, kind of thing. So the kind of foundational, the LLM approach to this is, if I'm using my reasoning models, is as a sales rep, I'm going to go out, take this lead, I'm going to go to whatever my favorite platform is, and I'm going to prompt, tell me about, Acme Corporation and what they might be challenged with, right? And I'm
Mm-hmm.
going to copy that information, I'm going to drop it in my Salesforce, and that's fine. There's information there. if you think about it from a workflow perspective, the same task, automated might be, well, when that record is saved, an automation fires and it goes out and it researches company detail and their challenges, right? And all of the context about the product you currently sell, challenges you solve are all passed as part of the instructions, right? And then the result is given back, it's parsed, and it's entered into those fields automatically with automation. And the benefit of this is you get the same output, but maybe it's a little bit more repeatable, in the sense that you're giving the same prompt every single time, so that as you look across records, you might have the same types of detail, better form challenges, those kind of information, right? Because you're giving some better boundaries, and you're passing some more context, right? I'm telling you about the product and challenges we solve, so maybe it's a little more focused. But now let's take it from like the agentic kind of angle. Same sales rep. I'm going to solve this. Oop, too far. Is every morning the sales rep's AI assistant reviews all the calls scheduled for the following day, with a calendar agent. So it goes through and says, "Oh, here's the 3 leads that have been booked on your calendar." It triggers 2 different agents, or 2 agents to go out and kind of do some research, one on company details, one on company challenges, and it pulls all of that information, from using an MCP, so it grabs it from the CRM of the companies that you're working with. It goes out and does its research on the web, and it assembles that all into a nice brief with a talking point, and kind of questions for that sales rep in their tone and style. So the agent knows how they speak, it knows how they ask questions, and it preps them. So we still got the information. We can still pass that information back to the CRM, but we've gone a step further, which is I'm just proactively as an agent checking your calendar. I'm giving you information. I'm writing it up in your style, and giving you details back. It's still kind of, there's still guardrails and there's still some decision that the AI agents are doing, but it's still pretty boxed in, right? It's a defined problem. The agents can kind of solve it, but hopefully, there's not too much repetition, within that, because again, you're focused. And so we don't have to have all of these like wildly proactive, agentic tasks where the agents are like living our lives for us. It's sometimes just what can I do so that the tasks that I'm already doing we just do them better, right? But let's
flip
this.
Less time, or we have more detail with them.
Exactly. More detail, more context, better output all around. Well, let's look at this from the customer scenario though, right? So this is an internal one. So now let's take this externally facing. So in this case, I've got a personalized shopping assistant. So, the assistant lives in an app or on the website, and Amanda here says, I'm going on a trip to Italy in September, and I'm looking for recommendations on what outfits I should buy. Okay, so there's the problem. A standard LLM, integration in this might be the assistant does a search for travel attire, from the website, and kind of summarizes the results with some recommendations and links. It's just giving you, rather than the customer doing a search and using filters, it's kind of doing that task for you and giving a more language-driven kind of response, right? Not a lot of thinking. It's just summarizing a search. A more automated method of this is the assistant might be programmed to ask a series of questions, right? Amanda, what's your style? What's your preference? What kind of clothes do you like? And so it gathers all of that information up, and then it does a more personalized search for those things, and then again comes back and gives recommendations and maybe prioritizes those based on the feedback it gave. Still kind of linear path here in the sense that it's programmed to ask some questions and summarize everything. But then the true agentic, or maybe the end model, is the assistant takes that and says, well, what do I need to do to solve this? Well, I want to know what Amanda has purchased in the past, and I want to look at the weather for her destination. So I know she's going to Italy in September, and I'm going to go ahead and pull all that information back. I'm going to highlight the ones that are, best reviewed for travel, because we can use context like product reviews, and then also say, but you bought a couple things. If you added these shoes or this jacket, this would be perfect for September weather in Italy, right? And it gives much more contextual information, and that sounds great. So let's walk through the architecture as we wrap up here. A real simplified, like what does that look like from a flow, and so very simple. You got this customer interaction. You've got a chat application. The user Amanda in this case gives the prompt and says, "I'm going to Italy." So in an agentic flow, the orchestrator says, "Okay, how do I solve this request?" And it first goes, "Okay, well, what context do I need? How do I make that decision?" And then ultimately using its thinking, it comes up with a plan of action. And so first it goes, okay, well, she's going to Italy in September. I need to know what products we have, and I need to know what the weather is going to look like, because I want to make a recommendation based on, that information. But also, I want to know more about Amanda, because these are recommendations for her. So in this case, using MCP, the agent connects to Telium, which is where all of her profile information lives. So we know Amanda's profile, her preferences, any context about her, and in this case, the transaction database, pulls all of her transaction details, so we know what Amanda's bought from this store in the past, and then all of that information goes back to the agent systems. It's summarized it. It takes all of that back to the chat application, and ultimately gives the LLM response back to Amanda. And again, this is the oversimplified non-technical version of that. But really, at a high level, is you're giving tools and context. Which is what we talked about way back on the first slide. You're giving tools and context to an LLM. The more tools and the more context you give, the better the results, the better the output. And that's where, from a Telium perspective, I'm really excited, because our ability to drive real-time information, our ability to drive, those personalized details, allow us to create really personalized experiences that were just never possible before, through rules or through triggered based personalization.
Yeah. And I think what's key here, obviously you're talking through one example, so these things are going to happen in a flow. But what's implied here is the AI agent actually gets to pick whether or not and when it looks up these tools and these resources. So it may actually hit up Telium first and get some location-based information that then impacts what it looks up in the weather tool. Or, there can be loops there, and it can decide when and how to access those resources, and whether those resources change how it accesses the other resources.
Absolutely. Yeah. So for example, if Amanda had said, I'm looking for a fall wardrobe, well, what does fall mean to you, to them? Well, where are they located? Because if they're located, in Texas versus New York, the fall may look wildly differently, at different times of the year. So yeah, again, you can, the first step is, how do I solve this? What context do I need? And then they can use the tools, to their advantage.
Yeah. And so much bigger and broader this can get with, you could bring in loyalty data. There could be other, data that you have available to this agent that then it can iterate on for how it wants to make the best experience for Amanda.
Exactly. So, well, that's all I have for today, Dustin. Obviously, this is a topic that will never stop, and may change. We may have to re-record this 3 or 4 more times before the end of the year to keep up on everything. So, but hopefully this was a good primer for everyone.
Yeah, no, it was really great, Zach. I really appreciated your insight. I think the main, one of the key takeaways I want to reemphasize here is, don't be intimidated that you feel like you have to get to this end state first. Just start with an output that you want to start integrating this technology into, and build on from there. Continue to integrate more automation, and eventually that will become autonomy, and then you have some agentic systems in place. But No, thank you so much again, Zach, and thank you retrospectively to all my additional panelists. Thank you all for attending these sessions. I hope you have enjoyed them. Please reach out to me. I'm Dustin Horning on LinkedIn, or you'll follow up with any Telium contact you have. If you have any feedback or questions, we'd love to hear from you. If you have ideas for what sessions we should do next, we want to make sure that we are generating content and experiences that are helpful and meaningful to you. So thanks again to everyone for participating, and I'll talk to you soon.